Hello everybody and welcome back, and today I've got another epic battle for all of you. Sort of going through my email the other day, looking at the different replays that got sent in, this one actually caught my attention just because of how much damage was actually done. So sort of watched it and thought, yeah, this is pretty damn awesome. So here we go, here's the video for it. It's a replay sent in from ZuupermaN. Yeah, I actually like the name too. It's a very interesting way to make something sound kind of like Superman. Anyways, and ZuupermaN is in Mogami, and he's got the Mogami in the 155mm setup. Actually, before I get to the actual replay, there's one other thing I want to talk about as well, which is that, you know, with patch 5.3 and the changes to advanced firing training, a lot of people are saying that the Mogami is going to become very, very weak, maybe even borderline unplayable in the 155mm setups. It is possible. I think that is a possibility. However, at the same time, during the time that I was watching the replay, a lot of the stuff that happened, a lot of the engagements that happened at ranges that were under sort of 15 kilometers. Yes, there were a few times where it was over, but a lot of it was sort of in that closer-ish distances, which also potentially suggests that, you know, the Mogami might be okay with the 5.3 changes. On the other hand, I mean, the Mogami in its current position with the 155s is really strong. The 155s, I think, is just the completely dominant setup over the 203mm guns, which is something that I don't think should actually happen. So in a way, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what that change will bring about. Alright, so let's take a look at the actual battle, and let's do a little bit of an analysis on it. First things first, let's take a look at this particular map paired with this particular ship. So this is the Shatter map, and Shatter has a lot of islands, and islands generally mean lots and lots of cover. So that's a very, very good thing for a cruiser like the Mogami, because it allows you to get out of trouble. In the event that you get into a position where somebody's shooting at you, especially a larger battleship, there are lots of islands to get cover behind. So that's a really good thing for ships like this. And second, ZuupermaN's got the 155s equipped on the Mogami. Not only that, the Mogami also has torps, which makes these islands sort of an ideal playground for the Mogami. You're able to take care of destroyers with the 155s, and the 155s do great damage, and they're fast, and if you're a destroyer and get caught within range of it, you can get wrecked. And also with the torpedoes, it allows you, just in the event that you need it against, let's say, a battleship or whatnot, to use your torpedoes to take care of them. So in a way, this is kind of like the ideal map with the ideal ship. But before we all, you know, grab out pitchforks and our torches and we scream that the Mogami's OP and it needs a nerf, you know, there is something I have to say, which is that typically these kinds of battles don't happen. The way you get a battle with this high of a damage amount is typically that you've got a team that's not very good, the enemy team's got a team that's not very good. You know, both teams sort of don't do much to each other, they don't actually do a lot of damage, and then you sort of get to go around and essentially farm damage. And so, you know, that is something that has to be said. You know, you're not going to get every battle that's going to be like this. Still, nevertheless, the Mogami is incredibly strong right now with the way that the game is. A lot of it comes from the fact that the Mogami is able to do this, which is it's able to continue lobbing HE at stuff way far away, like 17, 18 kilometers, and it's still able to drop high explosive on you. And so if you're in a battleship, the Mogami can and will oftentimes stop you in your tracks, because first of all, the HE salvos that the Mogami can output can do 7,000–8,000 damage. It can do that roughly every 10 seconds or so, which is a tremendous amount of firepower. And then of course it's got the range, so even when you decide to fall back, it's still able to drop shells on you. Furthermore, the Mogami has just so many shells with such a high rate of fire that it will hit you. You know, on the flip side, as a battleship, as you get around to, you know, sort of 17, 18 kilometers, hitting a smaller, more nimble, more agile cruiser gets to become quite a bit more difficult. So in that way, the Mogami is just unbelievably strong right now in that sense. But again, like I mentioned earlier, this kind of damage number doesn't happen every time. So anyways. Alright, so take a look at the map right now. On Zooper's side, the battleships have been held. They are no longer pushing, they're sort of just holding their position right now. On the other side of the map, the enemy team is pushing quite hard, and they've already pushed up to the point where Zuper's carrier is within firing range of the enemy ships. So that carrier is going to die obviously quite quickly, as being that big of a target, you're very easily focused down, and teams place a pretty high priority of killing you. So Zuper's team on that side is going to sort of fall apart, and the enemy team is going to have quite an advantage, having pushed out an entire flank essentially. Still, although I'm not sure if Zuper is aware of this at the moment, he is actually heading in the right direction, because he is going to bring additional firepower to support his team on that other flank. This is actually one of the things I'm not a huge fan of on Shatter or any map with the two split spawns. It's not something that I like much, because, you know, the teams sort of fight in isolation. Even though they're on the same team, they're just each fighting on one flank. And sometimes, depending on what ships spawn where, can drastically affect how that flank is able to hold out. So I'm not really the biggest fan of the whole split spawn concept. I mean, there are times even in certain battles where, for example, on Hotspot, where you have the split spawn that's like east and west, I've had situations where I've had like a destroyer and the only destroyer on my team be on like the other side of the map, while the enemy team has like 3 destroyers in a division on my side. And then it becomes really, really difficult for sort of some of the larger ships on my side to do anything, because we can't see where the destroyers are and we can't really hunt them. And then the one destroyer that's on my team is all the way on the other side, and it's going to take them a good number of minutes to get over. Now, so not something I'm really fond of in this game right now. So back to Zuper. I mean, by this point, so 7 minutes into this battle, he's already managed, just on the HE hits alone, about 38,000 damage, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you take a look at the number of fire set, there's been 8 fire sets so far. And fire damage, as you all know, is absolute, and there's fire number 9. And fire damage is absolutely lethal. And yes, I know, Wargaming's whole fire mechanic thing is a pain in the neck, and it's frustrating, and yeah, I'm still not 100% sure why they decided to go on that particular path. So, yeah, something to hope for changes to eventually, because it is just really frustrating. It's a frustrating mechanic to play against, and even to play with sometimes, because it seems a lot of times to just be RNG. I've had times where, you know, I've been hit by one shell and immediately burst into fire, and then on the other times when I'm playing the cruiser and I'm firing HE and stuff, it's like multiple salvos all landing multiple numbers of hits and not a single fire pops out. So it's just one of those mechanics that, yeah, it's just a little bit frustrating. Anyways, there is the Arsonist medal, as one of the Tirpitzes on the enemy team has been burned to death, and so that's a lot of damage already. I mean, we don't see the numbers on the damage counter, but that's already quite a bit of fire damage there. So Zuper comes upon the 2 enemy battleships that were pushing up onto his cap, and he's got them both within 15 kilometers. The Colorado is around 13.7. The Tirpitz is around 10 kilometers. Now, at first, the Tirpitz has his guns on Zuper, which means that at this range, the battleship could wreck him with a good salvo, but the appearance of the York between the 2 islands in that gap does, just for that little bit of time, take the attention of the Tirpitz away from Zoop and onto the York. And of course, the fact that the York was so close, the Tirpitz immediately realizes, oh damn, there's going to be torpedoes there, so the Tirpitz begins to turn away. And this turn away is going to expose a broadside, not to Zoop, but to the battleships. And he takes a pretty sizable salvo there, I think close to 20,000 damage there from one of the battleships. And of course, with under 10k HP, you know, that is going to be a very easy target for Mogami, just because, again, fire plus just sheer rate of fire and just HE ignoring armor, well, you know, you very quickly are going to die. And so, of course, when the Tirpitz dies, that entire side is going to lose its ability to push. However, this engagement didn't really have to turn out in that particular kind of way, because earlier there was actually a destroyer that was coming up that line with the Tirpitz, and that destroyer was actually very, very close to the 2 islands with the gap between them. Had the destroyer stayed, I think this engagement potentially could have turned out differently, because, you know, the destroyer would have been there, it would have had the York pop up, the destroyer would have immediately been able to get torpedoes out onto that York, And the York at that close distance would have been able to dodge because there's nowhere to run to, considering it was a small, narrow gap. Probably would have died really quickly. And that would have also given the Fubuki a chance to spot ZuupermaN's torpedoes, giving his battleships some sort of warning about those incoming torpedoes, and they might have been able to turn in rather than turn away, and therefore turn into a slightly better angle. Again, that's all hypothetical. I mean, again, anything can happen in battle, but it is something that I noticed. I mean, the abandonment of the battleships by that destroyer did indeed create some problems. Regardless of, the poor decisions made by individual ships, the enemy team is now in full retreat. The Colorado has been beat down pretty hard and is falling back. And at this time, an Atago pops up between those two islands in that gap where earlier that York was. And this Atago, talk about bad decisions. You're in a really awkward spot. You're coming through a gap. The enemy team has a battleship here, has Mogami here. And on this side, of course, the Atago won't be able to see. There's also a DD here. Coming through the gap is a big problem. Coming through the gap and then turning broadside, that is when you're just asking for it. And that combination of shells from the Mogami and the battleship drops that Atago from pretty much full HP down to 17k. And that just makes him easy food for the Mogami and its rate of fire. So very quickly, that Atago is no longer going to exist. Furthermore, the fact that there was smoke between those two islands also gives away the position of the Fubuki. And then this turns out to be that early warning, shall we say, for Zoop. Now he knows that as he approaches this gap, that a Fubuki is going to be waiting there for him. So he sticks reasonably close to the island, and that allows him, that when he does spot the torpedoes, to just turn into the island and to use the island as cover from those torpedoes, and thereby dodging all of them. Both the battleships on this side, on Zoop's team, have been killed, but he does manage to bag himself that Atago. At this point in time, the enemy team actually has an advantage. Even if they lose the Fubuki, if you look at what ships they have remaining, they in theory should still have an edge over ZuupermaN's team. First things first, they've got a carrier, and that's something that ZuupermaN's team lost really early on. So while a Lexington is not an Essex or a Midway by any stretch of the imagination, it can do good work. I mean, if you look at what's happening, there's a fighter hovering over ZuupermaN's destroyer, which means that that destroyer is going to get hunted down and killed sooner or later. So that means that this destroyer that ZuupermaN is actually going to kill is going to get evened out essentially by the fact that his own destroyer is going to get killed as well sooner or later. So aside from that, the enemy team definitely has an advantage. They've got a full HP Mogami, they've got a Lexington that is still reasonably healthy, they have a Tirpitz, and they have that extra Atago. So things are looking good so far for the enemy team. At least it does on paper, because you know what happens is no matter how well things look on paper, somebody is still going to go and accidentally screw it up, and that's pretty much exactly what happens. First things first, that comes out, there's the Atago, 5 kilometers away, 17,000 HP. ZuupermaN immediately goes, oh crap, there's something to worry about right there. The Atago actually has his guns aimed in at where ZuupermaN is, and that's dangerous because the Atago does have fantastic 203mm armor piercing. Zoop fires a salvo of high explosive, does a whole bunch of damage, manages to get high caliber, takes a return salvo from the Atago, and it is all high explosive. And what a waste. I mean, right here, had the Atago fired armor piercing when he was turning to dodge those torpedo planes, the Mogami would have taken massive numbers of Citadel hits. Okay, so manages to dodge the torpedo planes, manages to kill the Atago, enemy full HP Mogami coming towards them. And the enemy Mogami is firing armor piercing. ZuupermaN is firing armor piercing back, but the difference between the two ships is, first of all, where the hell is that enemy Mogami aiming at? That's the first thing. Second, why you go broadside? Because that's just asking for it. That is asking to get smacked. Because that is just so painful to watch. Full HP Mogami deciding to just go purely broadside, and aiming terribly as well. Just eating broadside salvos into that Citadel area, like just dying so quickly, doing pretty much no damage. And Zoop's like, well, thanks. And the minute that Mogami decides to turn and finally get angled, I mean, you know, easy kill, because by then, so little HP. And even HE alone can already finish him off. And then he turns and gives the other side. Oh. Oh, that makes it painful to watch. That engagement should have been a hell of a lot closer than what we just witnessed. But anyways, that whole engagement, those two cruisers just mindlessly sacrificing themselves to ZuupermaN, gives him just a metric ton of damage. By this point in time, on just hits alone, he's managed, first of all, let's count the awards: High Caliber, Confederate, Arsonist, Kraken, 393 hits already, 22 fires set, 5 ships sunk. So already managed, just on HE and AP damage alone, 157,338. And just wait, we're still going to have to count the other damage. We're not there yet. Okay, so now the enemy Tirpitz appears. And here's the part where I have that urge to just want to like tear my hair out. That Tirpitz still has most of its HP. A Tirpitz can single-handedly engage a North Carolina and a New Orleans by itself with a pretty damn good chance of succeeding in that engagement. Primarily because Tirpitz has troll as hell armor. It's got torpedoes, and neither the New Orleans and the North Carolina, both of them do not have torpedo weapons. So the Tirpitz could have closed in, you know, angled himself against the North Carolina, taken minimal damage, killed off the New Orleans, and then gets really, really close to the point where most of the North Carolina shells wouldn't have been having any real effect, and then just gone for torps. And he could have killed them both with probably a good amount of HP to spare. Nope, Tirpitz was just running away and running. I mean, even here, right now, with one North Carolina, Tirpitz is still running away. Lexington on the enemy team, getting pinched in by both sides, really had no choice, I think, except to go towards the middle. See, again, the carrier ran out of options and got maneuvered into a really, really difficult position. Had the Tirpitz turned around and just gone, you know, direct engagement with those battleships, the carrier would still have been able to survive. The carrier stayed alive. This engagement would have gone differently as well, because certain other ships would have been able to be taken care of by the carrier, you know. So it's just one of those really frustrating things where you just watch the enemy team play and you're just like, oh, why so many screw-ups? And then of course the Tirpitz gets into range of ZuupermaN, and ZuupermaN's like, well, thanks for coming all this way, because I'm just gonna burn you some more with my high explosive, doing, you know, 5,000 damage salvos every like 10 seconds, and those friggin' hurt. Because you think about it, if you do 5,000 damage a salvo in 3 salvos, which is the same time it takes for a battleship to reload, you've done the equivalent of like a Citadel hit and a little bit worth of damage. And there's the Witherer medal. So with a minute 20 something left on the clock, ZuupermaN manages to claim the Witherer medal as well. And that's a minimum 60,000 damage in fires and flooding. And all this time, he's actually not gotten any torpedo damage. So that's kind of cool. It's just been guns. Enemy team even congratulates ZuupermaN for doing a good job. So yeah, you know, you can figure how disappointed they were with their own team. Like, good lord. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, to get insanely high damage numbers, it's more than, you know, your own individual performance. You've really got to run sometimes into those terrible super potato teams. You know, oh, look at that. Like, that Tirpitz. You could have done so much for your team. So by this point in time, let's just look at what's happened already. Over 200,000 damage in high explosive and armor piercing. 200k damage there. And we're not counting things like fire and stuff like that. So that's just an incredible amount of damage. And even eventually when Zoop does kind of get into trouble a little bit with the Tirpitz, that's where those islands come in handy. You can just maneuver behind an island, stay safe, and force the battleship to come after you. And, you know, eventually, had this battle gone on for another 60 seconds or a minute or two, whatever, I'm pretty sure another set of torpedoes would have headed towards the Tirpitz and might have netted him another kill. By the way, single combat against the Tirpitz, and the Mogami comes out losing a couple thousand health while the Turpitz is lost. Jeez, just like a metric ton of HP. Yeah, fires are very balanced, right? Wargaming, very. So here we go. Premium account netted ZuupermaN 662,000 credits, 11,614 experience. Witherer, you know, Arsonist, High Caliber, Confederate Kraken, 562 hits with shells, 6 ships sunk, 30 fires set, 4 hits to the Citadel. Just incredible amounts of hits and just damage. I mean, just incredible. I mean, I was just looking at that and I went, wow. I should go get myself a Mogami. Base experience, 3,871 on a cruiser. That's a phenomenal amount of base experience. That is more base experience than the next 2 highest ships on ZuupermaN's team added together. So just a phenomenal amount of base experience. And of course, you obviously want to know what the damage amount was. And so here we go. 38,000 from AP, 170k from HE, 81,000 from fires. No torpedo hits, and then secondary shell added in there another 1,700 damage. Added all together, ZuupermaN manages 300,908 damage in a Mogami. That is the kind of damage numbers you see out of tier 10. So, holy crap, ZuupermaN. That was a fantastic battle in terms of damage. Good job. Anyways, folks, I mean, hope you enjoyed seeing a Mogami do over 300,000 damage and absolutely wreck the enemy team. Anyways, have a good one, and I'll talk to all of you again soon.